Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. We're super excited to have you again. Mike, how you doing tonight?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm super excited about tonight because we get to talk about um, graph, and only after seeing what things that James was working on did I really understand the power of graph and actually all the things that he added to it. I think was super great. So with that, let me just bring in James. How you doing, James?
I'm doing pretty well, considering it's 1:37 in the morning my time. It's
Yes.
I'm bearing up quite nicely, as you might notice. I'm taking slugs of caffeine to keep myself going.
Well, we
And
certainly appreciate you doing that and coming and joining us this evening. And we're super glad to have you from across the pond. So that's good. So tell me a little bit about where you come from and that kind of stuff. Like, what's your background?
okay, to give you some background, I live in England, not very far from Oxford. I've been in this industry for just over 30 years now. I started by doing a degree in computer science, went to work for a PC manufacturer, and basically stayed with Microsoft products pretty much my whole career. Got into I've always been into automating things, but that really took off with PowerShell when I was working at Microsoft. And before I left Microsoft, I wrote the initial module for doing Hyper-V management. Originally, the Hyper-V shipped with some WMI support, but it didn't have a PowerShell wrapper for it. So I wrote one and got a couple of 100,000 downloads for my effort. And then just as Microsoft decided they didn't need my services anymore, the product team took that work and used it as a sort of draft standard for doing the job properly. So a lot of the PowerShell commands you see for Hyper-V even today started with the commands that I wrote, even though they don't share any code. Yeah, but the product team basically came along and reworked them and said, "Oh, well, we need to have a command that looks like this and takes these parameters." And so my old scripts written for my old module will still work with the current module if they were written right, which is quite nice. And then I've been involved in one or two other things. Doug mentioned that I've been involved with a couple of his modules and done some stuff around Selenium and testing that. And I've also got some of my code in the Azure DevOps module that Donovan Brown looks after.
So I can tell just from listening to you with your history and seeing some of the things that you've done in other repos and stuff like that, that you have a very big developer background, probably a huge depth of knowledge. We kind of jumped in here a little bit fast. For the people that are joining us from YouTube who might have found this online, we're going to be talking about the Microsoft.Graph +Plus module tonight, which is a module that James wrote to basically fill in the gaps for the Microsoft Graph API. And that's what I wanted to ask you, James. Like, how did you get started down this path with this module? Was it just out of frustration, or was there another? How did like the going from Graph to saying I'm going to build my own thing to make it better?
So basically, I wanted to be able to poke messages into Teams. And the work that I was doing at that point, I wanted just to be able to say, post a message into a Teams channel. And I started looking around, and the way to get into Teams was Graph. So I then started to have a look at what else was in Graph, and it was like, oh wow, they've connected everything to this. And I'll put up a slide when I start the presentation proper that's actually got a list of all the things that I talk to. But there is this enormous spread of things that you can talk to. So it's not just Teams and it's not just Azure Active Directory, but it's also OneNote. So I'd written some code a long time ago to poke things into OneNote, and I said, oh, I can do that through Graph. And you can interact with Excel through Graph, and you can interact with this huge plethora of stuff. So I wrote a module to do this, and just as I let it out into the world, the product team said, "Oh, we've got a module for that." And I kind of went, "Oh, great! Thanks a lot. That's several months of my spare time that's gone into that, and it comes to nothing." And then I started looking at what they'd done and went, "It's not really very well done." Again, I'll talk about some of the drawbacks of the way that they work. But basically, what they've done is they've taken, most people will call them Swagger files, but they're properly called Open API files. But they've taken those files and they've run them through a code generator. And every API in Graph gets a function. And they're all treated exactly the same. So if you want the function remove shared iPhone user, that is implemented every bit as well as create new user account, right? Or every bit as badly. But it was all done by people who had never seen PowerShell. So nothing pipes into anything. Nothing tab completes. There are no what if switches.
So that's what I was going to lead into next, and then I was going to turn it over to you and let you talk about your presentation, which is when I was designing the write-up for this meeting, I hear you talking about plugging in to all these different products that the Graph API talks to, but in some ways your module, as I'm giving a little foreshadow here, fills in the gaps for some of the expected PowerShell things that they kind of didn't put in there, correct?
Exactly right, yes.
Right.
And it's and this is the problem that you have if you auto-generate code from an API spec, that an API is an interface for a programmer to take some logic and produce a program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you just have a converter that says, I will take something that says set graph user manager, and I will create a graph user manager function, all you're doing is you're turning that, you've got the thinnest possible wrapper for the API. And there's no actual application program in there. There's no logic. There's no sense between the user and the REST call. There's just this really thin wrapper. And I gave some of the people on the product team a tough time about it, and they said, "Well, yeah, we're not PowerShell people." Well, okay, so why are you doing a PowerShell module, guys? Would you like some PowerShell help? Because I'm available if you want me. Well, we don't really know. Okay, well, fine. So eventually, I just said, I can take all that logic that I'd written before, and instead of calling my code to do things like log on and actually call the REST API, I could call their code. And I could return the same rich objects that they were returning, because part of the API spec said we'll create proper object definitions. So I said, well, I can take all of that, I can take all of what they're doing and use my existing logic, and that's how this version came back as with this plus tag on it, because it's obviously extending what's been done.
Awesome. So there's the lead in, folks. If you joined us from the internet and you wasn't sure what this is about, James is going to start demoing his module here about additions to the Graph API that make it better, faster, bigger, easier. And that's what we're going to hand it over to him in a little bit. We just want to remind people, if you're joining us, we'd love for you to click the subscribe button so you can keep up on all the videos that we post. This is a very active PowerShell user group. We post twice a month, so there's plenty of content. We'd love for you to join us. But James, I'm really excited to see what you have, and I don't want to keep you because people may not be aware. Phil and I are in North Carolina. James is in England, and it's very late for him. We don't want to keep him up any later than we have to this evening. So we're going to hand it over to James. Take it away, sir.
Hopefully you can see I'm sharing a desktop.
Yes.
Yes, and make it a little bit.
Well, that's always a good start, I find. So what I'm going to do is I've got my little PowerPoint presentation here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, by the way, we were talking about photography. Just in the background, there is some of the photographs that I do. So that's just outside my back door, and I like to go to places that other people don't get to. So London Underground lets you visit some of their closed off tunnels. And there are a couple from the Grand Prix this weekend. So let's launch PowerPoint, and we'll see if I can sort of step through and explain some of this. So I called this the who. Let's try that properly. So who, where, what, why, and how. And we've just got 8 quick slides here, but who, we've talked about some of this, and there's some contact details for me, and how long I've been doing this. I worked for Microsoft until 2010. I spent a couple of years working for the Mercedes Formula One team, and anyone that wants to talk about contract work can get me through modular consulting. For anybody that doesn't know what a modular is, it's a large flat fish. It's a relative of the manta ray, so it's one of that family, and that gives away my other interest in scuba diving. This is almost entirely my own work. There's a couple of bits that Justin Grote wrote that I've incorporated into it, and I've made sure I've marked the code where I've done that. So I was joking with Justin that he just has to download my repo and search for his own name, and he can see where I've taken his code. Anybody else who has something for the pot, they're more than welcome to get in touch with me. The source code is here, and the module is available there. So that's the where is it. So yeah, I'm for reasons I don't entirely understand. Most places J O'Neill is unique, but there was already a J O'Neill on GitHub, so I'm JH O'Neill there, and rather than the short form of my name. So what is Graph? Now, you can see this fairly large diagram over here, and there is lots and lots of stuff that we can get at. This by the way, both the PDF and I think the Visio file for this are in the module. So if you download the module, this is included. But you can see we've got directory bits with licensing, with users, with groups. We've got bits that relate to OneDrive and SharePoint. We've got bits that relate to Outlook and Exchange, both the calendar side of Outlook and the mail side. We've got access to the planner, and I mentioned that Teams was the initial jumping off point. And although it's a bit small to see on the slide, along here you actually got some of the commands. So what's the plus plus module? As we were talking about in the lead-in, the product group have produced what they think of as an SDK, but they've released them as full-on modules. They're not very PowerShelly is the way that I describe them, and so what I've tried to do is make the whole thing more usable and more PowerShelly. It will interoperate with the SDK modules. So if anybody's out there has used the SDK modules, you can mix and match the SDK modules with the code that's in here. And in fact, this code relies on the DLLs from the SDK modules to do some of its stuff. I've also added a couple of extra methods of logging on over and above what the SDK does, and we'll see those right at the start of the demo. Why do it? Well, let's go on to the next slide. So there is an API reference. The file is, as I was saying in the lead-in, most people still call them Swagger files, but officially they're called Open API files, and these files define what's in there. So you can see the bit that's in the blue text at the top says there's an HTTP put command, and if you send something to this particular URL and the body text contains this, then that, for example, will set the manager for a user. And this is all very fine and good until you realise that you've got to dig out user IDs. User IDs aren't too bad because they're user principal names, so they're bob@mobularconsulting.com. But the major issue with these is you actually have to go and find IDs for things like groups, and a lot of these IDs are GUIDs and they're not easy to discover. So you end up with a command like that one there in the first bullet point, and by not being PowerShelly, you would think, oh, I can take a user, or I could take 10 users and pipe them into set user manager. Well, no, you can't. That doesn't work. There's no what if support, so you've got delete without confirmation or anything like that. So those things are dangerous. There's no tab expansion. Now, if any of you have worked with organizations, and I'm working with one at the moment, where everybody is in the domain.onmicrosoft.com domain for their user principal names, you find very quickly it becomes incredibly tedious to keep typing the domain name. Well, anyway, that bit gets incredibly tedious. So tab completion I thought was quite important, so I put that in. And also, you don't really want 10 different commands to set all the different properties of a user, or at least I don't think so. I don't think you want a set user manager command and then a set user department command. You want a set user command, and you set everything. You set everything from one command, and we'll see some of this in action. So, how does it work? Basically, the way that it's driven is it uses the modules from the SDK. So it loads whichever DLLs it can find. It has to find the authentication one, so it won't work unless you install Microsoft.Graph.Plus.Plus, and that's a dependency for it. And then based on the DLLs it's able to find, it loads additional scripts. So if you haven't downloaded the module that provides support for SharePoint, for example, you get all of the Graph ++ except for SharePoint. And an awful lot of stuff is enabled just by downloading the users module, but there are other bits as well. Now, inside the SDK, there's a connect command, and basically we call that connect command directly, and these additional logon methods I mentioned before, and we're going to see in a minute, they get an access token and pass it to Connect-Graph, and then the functions support all the stuff I was complaining was missing. And the template for every function is check that we've got a connection. Because Graph supports both proper Microsoft accounts and or proper Azure AD accounts and Microsoft personal accounts, we check that we've got the right kind of logon, because you can access your consumer OneDrive and your consumer OneNote through this, but if you try and access user accounts, obviously that's not going to make sense for a consumer account. So we check we've got the right kind of connection. We call the invoke command that's in the SDK, and that will return a lump of JSON. We then convert those JSON into that JSON into the right kind of object, and we've got a format XML and a type XML file to actually control what happens to those objects afterwards. So the type XML adds some extension properties, and the format, well, the format formats it. So the next question is how, and that is the last of my 8 slides. This is demonstration time. I am going to show some things that are intended to error, but I fully expect us to get what I like to think of as spontaneous errors. So we may see some things that were not exactly as planned. So
James, got a question for you before you
yeah.
get to the demos, and this is probably a little bit off topic, but related to the scope of the presentation. So my function is an Active Directory admin and directory services, Azure Active Directory, all that stuff. And so you can imagine I work within the AZ module a lot.
Yeah.
And, there's been iterations of that module, some good, some bad. There's this version of the commandlets, that version of the commandlets. And so to give people some perspective here, or at least what your insight here is, your thoughts, there are these Microsoft written PowerShell modules like AZ and all the sub-modules, and then there's the Graph API. Do you think that in the future, it's the Graph API and the modules sort of tail off? What's the purpose of the Graph API if the modules are there?
So I think if you look at any Microsoft web service, there is a REST API to work with it, and they all follow a very similar pattern for how they authenticate and how you basically send a lump of JSON to an endpoint and get some JSON back, and you've either you've done one of the typical CRUD operations. So you've either created something, read it, updated it, or deleted it. And once you've seen one of those, they all look very similar. Now, what's been layered on top of those? First of all, you've got a web interface that most of the time is calling that. And some of the time, the only way you can find out how some of these API calls work is actually to call up the developer tools in your browser and see what's being poked at underneath. And we had to do some of that for the Azure DevOps stuff I was talking about in the preamble. Now, the REST API can be the underpinnings for PowerShell commandlets. It is the underpinnings for both the AZ CLI that is written in Python and all the different PowerShell commandlets. As someone who's now outside of Microsoft, it looks to me as if there are multiple teams almost competing with each other to produce some of these command line interfaces. Okay. And so we have seen, I think, 3 or 4 different ways of creating a user account, for example. And some of those modules don't work in all situations. Some of them only work with Windows PowerShell, so they don't work in the Cloud Shell. Some of them, and we've had a number of challenges with those. I think the long-term trend is that Graph will be the API through which things get called, and then somebody will have to come along and implement something on top of them. So if Microsoft do their job properly, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here will get subsumed into things that come out of Microsoft, but they're not doing that, anytime soon.
Okay, so the API is the normal programming interface, which many developers and other tools are using to interface with the Azure cloud, and the modules are maybe how infrastructure people are more used to interfacing with Azure, but the Azure modules have some gaps, and the Graph API has a ton of power. So James says, you know what? I'm tired of these crappy AZ modules. I'm going to fill in the gaps on my Graph thing here and be able to do Graph in a PowerShell way. Am I in the ballpark here?
Yeah, there's that. So effectively, you've got a module that you have multiple modules that will do users and groups. You have something else that will do teams. You then say, but if I want to put data into a OneNote notebook, or I want to access my calendar, or any of those things, Graph becomes this way into all of that.
Gotcha.
And so if you in fact, let me just, I should have it close to hand.
I was
but-
basically playing the role of someone wondering, like, why would I use Graph if there's an AZ module that gets me to, you know, various parts of Azure? So now I understand.
Yeah. So what Graph isn't doing, for example, there's no Graph interface currently to say I want to instantiate a new SQL server. Right? There is a REST API that is very like Graph that sits underneath that. Okay, and there was a thing I was doing with some ARM templates at the end of last week, and something came along and it basically said, you have just deleted something and it's only soft deleted. And you think, oh, great, okay. So go to this link and it will tell you how to remove this soft deleted thing. And the answer comes back, you have to do it by calling the REST API. There is no CLI, there's no Azure CLI interface for it. There's no PowerShell command for it. And the call is very, very like a call to Graph, except it's not actually Graph that you're talking to. It's a REST API that's very Graph-like, but it's another endpoint that you call to talk to that. So Graph is doing all these things, but there are a lot of if you're doing, like I say, Azure SQL or you're creating Azure VMs, all of the Azure resource stuff really sits outside this.
Okay.
All right, so let's get right into the meat of it. Like, I want to see visually.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm sorry to take them off track, but just trying to give some reference for the person that's wondering, like, why Graph?
Okay, so I talked about the log.
Let's make that bigger, before. James. Can we make that bigger?
Sorry?
Can we make that bigger?
Let's see.
How's that going to affect you?
How's that doing? Is that looking better?
It's good.
So, now if you've actually installed the SDK modules, if you just try and load the module just called Microsoft Graph, it takes quite a long time to load. Okay, well, there's mine loaded, and you can see it just says right, and I'm ready to connect. So I'm just going to run Connect-MgGraph from Azure. Okay, and what you'll see there is it doesn't recognize the parameter from Azure session. Okay, it's just not having any of it, and the reason for that is that is a dynamic parameter, and it only enables when we're connected to Azure. So what I'm going to do is say I want to use an existing Azure connection. So I'm going to take that account. I did that earlier, but it has actually connected successfully. And then I can do this same command again. So I just call that, and this time if I tab complete it, you'll see it recognizes from Azure session. And I'm connected now. This is something I pinched from Justin Grote, that we've now got a normal Azure access token, and we've said to Graph, we want you to keep using this access token. That access token will eventually time out, and we've spotted that it will eventually time out. And when it does, we will go and get a new access token. So I've got a little command modeled on who am I. It's called G who am I. And it's funny. One of the drawbacks of having the memory in the buffer is if you mistype a command, it remembers the mistyped command. As you can see, I can't type who am I reliably. It becomes who may. But you can see here it says I've got a user provided access token, and I can do certain things that Graph refers to as scopes. So I have these things that I can do, and this is the account that I'm logged on with. So this is my admin account, and you can see this gives you some clue as to why I don't want to be typing my full user profile name the whole time. Of course, who am I is an alias. So it's got a proper name, show graph session, and I can start doing proper graph commands in here. So I can actually do get graph user and get a list of users in the system. With my monitor size like this, you can see it gets a bit hard to read. But one of the things I've done with users, I talked about having a types file. I actually define a property set for users, which is called organization. So if I do get user and format table or by organization, you can see I get my my users here. And you might pick up that there is a slightly Dickens theme going on here with a couple of my users. We shouldn't really have Jacob as a manager, and we'll come back to that in a minute. I can do some other stuff, so I can get things like the accounts group, but if I try and get the OneDrive for the accounts group, it doesn't work with the Azure Access Token, because those scopes say I can do these things, but I can't do absolutely everything. I've only got access to some branches of the Graph API. So I'm just going to scroll back up to where I had my session information there. And I'm just going to open another PowerShell window, and I'm going to do a different kind of login. So same kind of thing, import the module, and I've got my credentials stored in an XML file. So with a bit of luck, we'll import the module, import the credential, tell it we want to log in with the credential, and you might notice I've said that this is going to fail. And the same thing again, credentials are dynamic parameter, and the module's got like an auto-exec file that's called settings.ps1, and in settings.ps1 it says, right, we're going to set the default usage location for licenses. It's one of the things that really annoys me, that you actually have to go and set that. So when I create users, I automatically set it. What are the default properties we get for a user? And a bit further down, we've got your tenant ID, the name of an app that is known to your Azure directory, and then a secret that's associated with that app. And you can embed those in the file. You shouldn't be embedding the secret. You should be reading it from something that's encrypted it. But I've got that in another settings file. So what I can do is I can just load my other settings file, which should be this one here. And now if I run the connect, it will connect with that credential, and you can see again it's a user provided access token. But if I switch back to the previous version, you can see this set of scopes here. I had this very limited set of scopes available to me when I logged on, piggybacked onto my Azure session. And over here you can see I've got a much bigger set of scopes. You can also see I've logged on with a different user account. So this is my non-admin user account. And I can do the same stuff that I did before. So I can do get graph user. I can do, in fact, I'll just type this in here. Some of these I've got abbreviations in for, so you can see I can do get graph group. It's just GGG, and then if I just tab complete, you see it actually goes and gets my group names. Okay, so I don't want to be typing an ID or having to type a full name like Global Data Connect Admins, because I can't remember how that's punctuated. You know, is it global underscore data connect underscore admins? So these sorts of things, I can just say, go and get the accounts group. And if I want the members of the accounts group, well, that's how I get the members of the accounts group. And
so you're saying that most of your stuff here all supports that tab complete. So if I'm doing group names, it will do groups, and if I have that scope, and it'll allow me to enumerate those, it will do that for me.
Yes.
And I could even do some discovery of some of that stuff. That's super powerful.
Oh yeah. Well, so I'll show you a bit more of that on the next page. But yeah, we can do things like expanding that. We can do things like if we take the consultants group that I'm in, we can go and find out their my site. You can see I've just stuck that result in an output variable. So the out variable of that's now in my team site. And then if I go and say, get me that site and specifically get me its lists, you can see that these are the lists that exist on that site. So you can see I've created one for tracking issues in a project and various other bits and pieces. Some of these you can see are quite new and some go back quite a long way, but we can do that, and we can go and start interrogating the SharePoint site. So if I say, let's go and get the problems list one. So just call that again. And then we can see what columns are in that list. And we can get the items from that list and specific properties as well. Okay, so pretty straightforward kind of stuff. And I've got some commands in here to work with Planner as well, so I can go and get the plans for my team. So these are the Planner plans that we have. And I can start mucking about with the items in the plan. And I'm just going to move on from there.
James,
yeah.
You used the output variable parameter for one of your commands just a moment ago.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that was a requirement, or if you could have actually done something like you did two statements later, which is to assign with an equal sign.
So the reason for doing this is just so that this runs and we see the output of it, and I've got it in a variable for the next command. Okay, and it's if I was going to do that, so that's just saved me the equivalent of having $problems list here. Okay, so if I found I was writing that combination, rather than writing that combination there, I would just do this version.
Got it. So it gives you the ability
to space saver.
Right, it just gives you the ability to see output and assign to a variable. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that it's great for demos. I very rarely use it in real world code, I have to tell you. But yeah, it's a really useful thing to do. Actually, one of the I say I rarely use it. I've been using it this week again for when I'm running a script that calls lots of other pieces. I can stick each piece in an output variable. And if I run that script in the global scope, then I've got those variables available afterwards. So I have used it in other places, but mostly I don't. So the two specialist logons I've shown you, but this last one, I'm going to go back to my admin account, and I'm literally just going to go Connect-MgGraph. Who am I? So. Back it comes, And this time I've got all those scopes. And you notice where before it said the authorization type in both of these was I'd gone and got my own access token. Okay, so it's a user provided access token. Here, it actually says it's a delegated logon. And what we've now done is we've logged on as if we were just using the normal SDK. This is just called Connect-MgGraph, and which has saved my credentials. There's a disconnect graph that you can run that logs you out. Otherwise, you just get signed in with the same account you used last time for each session. So I'm now logged in as that. I'm going to create. I need to make a couple of changes. So we were talking about piping users and doing things of that sort. So let me just do a little quick busk here. So I'm going to do get graph user when I can type Bob, and you can see it'll tab complete Bob. All right, so and I can do FT organization. So there's Bob. We can see where he works. We can do in actual fact, because Bob is his first name, I can just do get graph user Bob and it finds him. Okay, and again, that's stuff that the API just won't do. You have to write quite a long and complicated filter to say where the name begins with Bob. So if I do, if I go and look for his boss, for example, I can go and search for JAC star and I'll find him. Okay, so that kind of stuff is really quite useful. Now I can also do things like get graph user, where department. I'm just going to move these users because my next demo is actually going to yes, it's finance pipe 2. So I can do pipe that to set graph user minus department, and this time I'm going to move them to legal. And if I go back, you can see Bob was in finance here.
So James, now, you bring up a really good point here that you just made a few minutes ago. I'm watching you do this, and in the course of 10 or 15 minutes here, I think I've forgotten that you're using the Graph API. It feels extremely PowerShell, like we're just using any old normal PowerShell module. I forget that we're actually using the Graph API for this.
And you shouldn't, as a PowerShell user, you shouldn't care what the API is underneath. Okay.
Right.
And this is something I've got really, there's a couple of other talks I've done where I basically said, if you make your users understand the internals of how stuff works, they will hate you.
You're doing it wrong.
Yeah. And that's as basic as something like the user doesn't want to know when you query something from SIM or WMI. Okay. The query syntax for that is a SQL-based syntax. So wildcards use a SQL style %, not a star. Why does anybody ever make the user need to know whether the API underneath uses SQL syntax or good old fashioned star syntax? Why not just say, if I see a star, change it to a %? And there are 101 things like that. And you just don't want, apart from the fact there's graph in the commands, nobody wants to know what the API is underneath. I mean, you can, look, if you really want to know, you can go verbose and it will say, this was the API I called, the URL that I called to get that information back.
And that's just gross.
Right? But
I think the magic there is as well is that, like, someone thinks, oh well, yeah, you can construct that entire thing for you, or you can simply just use get graph user And some of that, like the API, well, yeah, build all these parts, construct that expand property properly, and do all this like gross stuff, like you said. And that's really what the magic is, and that's why I was super excited to see this. Oh,
by the way,
that.
This is what you have to do a search for a user by name, right?
And by the way,
you have to pass that as a parameter.
And by the way,
who on earth thinks that's acceptable?
Well, so that's my point I was going to make, which is to Phil's thing they were just saying. So just imagine there's somebody watching this video and they're a beginner user and they're trying to get their head around the Graph API and they have to try to type or write out the right syntax that's equal to your verbose, the get that you have there. There is no user that wants to do that is going to feel comfortable doing that. It's going to take them probably hundreds of tries for them to feel so comfortable that they feel a real easy comfort level with the Graph API. You're taking all that away and you're just saying, well, whatever you know with the AD module or normal PowerShell client management, file services, it's the same. It's basically the same now.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, what's come back from the guys in the product team that I've given a hard time to has been, but everybody who uses PowerShell is a developer. And you go, well, no, a lot of people just use PowerShell because it's a shell and they want to be able to type a command line. And, this kind of stuff, this is not acceptable. And even if you're a developer, you're not going to put you're not going to write this every time you want to find a user.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
that's what I was saying. Just because I can develop the code and I can construct that if I want to, but why should I have to? Like, why should I go through that hassle?
Let me show you a couple more things, because one of the things that I typically do. Look, if I do get graph user Jacob, right, and get his direct reports, we know that he's gone. By the way, I create users with silly names. I've forgotten I've got that one in there. But as well as Bob, we've got Doug Graves. We'll probably find we have people with names like Helena Handcart and Carol Singer and various other silly names before we're done. But I can take those users and look, they're users, right? So we can send them into set graph user, right? So you saw up here, right? Bob's manager was Jacob. Right. Oh, and by the way, we've expanded that to his display name, not his user principal name. So we're going to make me the manager of anybody that did report to Jacob. One command. Okay. And if I go back to get Bob, he now reports to me. How easy is that?
Right? That's damn easy.
Or, well, so you see I've got my silly users here, right? So if I go get graph domain, I've got two domains in my subscription, okay? And Azure knows that this one is the default, not that one. So if I go to create a user, my typing is all the pot. New.
I can relate.
Graph user. So we've actually got in this command a nickname rule, okay? And this is the command that created that user above. I don't want to do that this time. You notice I've said just use his given name here. Well, I'm going to take that rule out. So we'll use the default rule for creating a nickname for him, and we'll and Joe Black, and we'll let Jacob be his manager again. Okay, so I can just go in here and start typing. Just to avoid too much round tripping to the server, the user fields will only complete if you've typed something. So I need to at least put in part of Jacob. But for groups, I can actually say, put him in accounts and finance and authors, and he can go in as many groups as I want. And then, oh, I want to assign him some licenses as well. So this time we can say what licenses does he want. So we can give him the Power BI standard license. We give him Power BI standard because that's free, I think. And
so
I've just created a user, put them in some groups, given them a manager, and I've given him a password. I have this trick, by the way, and I will recommend this for auto-generating passwords. I take a 400-year range of dates from 1800 to 2200, and just randomly pick one of those dates and then format it in this form, because this meets the usual 8 characters, upper and lowercase, and numbers. And for an initial password that has to be changed, that's really quite good enough. But we've worked out what his display name should be. We've worked out what his user principal name should be from just a first name and last name. All right. We've put him in groups. So if I go get graph user Joe.b start, there he is, and I can see what he's a member of. Okay, and all of that has been license. What did I want? I want the one for, I think I gave him Power BI standard. So who have I given licenses for Power BI standard to? Okay, those kinds of things, as you see, we just tab complete them automatically. Or I can look at that the other way around and look at Joe's licenses. All pretty easy stuff. Yeah. So go on.
I still am really sort of wrapping my head around the idea that we've gotten away from all that Graph API crap, and you're doing what any standard PowerShell user kind of understands. Someone who's read month of lunches can fit right in with what you're doing here. It's still a concept to me that is very, I'm very appreciative of the time and the effort that you put in to make this happen.
Oh, well, thank you. So, look, we're not going to do. There's quite a long demo here, and we're not going to do all of it. But just to show you some of the other stuff that's in here, because of the reach of Teams. So I'm going to create a new group in Teams. All right. So what we're going to do is we've already got. So I moved those people into legal, and you can see here I should have done the output variable trick here, but I didn't do it this time. So I'm going to get a set of users. There are my users who are in legal, and I'm going to create a new team in Microsoft Teams for the people in legal. Now, when you do this in Graph, what happens is the group is created first, and then it is Teams enabled. And you can see here it has to retry a few times for Azure to finish doing some of the stuff underneath. Sometimes this takes a full minute, sometimes it happens in a couple of seconds, but there we go. We've now got a team set up, and you can see that these are Teams style properties on there. Now,
so with just as easily as the PowerShell, you can basically, hey, create a new team. I can even get my team, the existing teams I'm currently in, and then kind of change the allow Giphy and all that kind of stuff. I can do all that stuff right from here. And
Oh,
I guess
yes.
what you're going to get to at this point.
So yeah, you just go set graph team, $new team, and then what you want to change.
Oh, Jesus, awesome.
You want to allow Giphy or not?
Sure.
And I think one of the things that I try to do is I try to avoid using Booleans. So if I want to forbid Giphy, this is a switch, and you have to actually use switch : false, and it will then disallow Giphy. So if I do that, it should, and there you go. That one's actually got confirmation requirement in there. So yes, I do want to do that. And if I do get graph team new team like that, it should come back, and you can see Giphy's gone from true to false. So it was true there, and it's now false. As easy as that. Okay, and the team's got should have a OneDrive. All right, and it's got a calendar. So we've got all of those. This one was playing up earlier on. It was creating the notebook but refusing to get it. And this time, it's actually working properly. So we've got a OneNote notebook for the team, and we've got a channel for the team. Okay, so we can do some stuff. So let's have a look at the OneDrive. Okay, so there's nothing much in OneDrive at the moment, but just to save me typing -drive team drive all the time, I can just set a home drive, which just sets the default parameter for the drive commands later. So I can say make that my home drive, and now I can run get graph drive without having to specify which drive it is all the time. So if I go and ask for the special folder called documents, well, there isn't a special folder called documents yet. So you see it says the folder exists, but there was nothing to return there. But if I look at the root folder again, you can now see, as well as general, we've got a documents folder. So we ought to be able to copy to that folder, shouldn't we? I mean, that would kind of make sense. So let's actually just go find the Excel files in the temp directory and copy them up there. And you can see I've gone to a little bit of trouble to try and make this look like a bit like a drive. So you can see we're in documents, and the path is root documents, and that's the file we just copied up there. And if I do a directory of that folder, so before it said the folder exists but have nothing to return. Now if I run that same command again, you can see the files in there, and I can go and just open the web page for that. So this is the root of the drive, and you can see we've got the documents folder there, and there's the test file that I just uploaded to it.
So James, I'm a little confused. So
only a little.
The work here is exceptional, right? It's just not only have you made commandlets that are easy to use, but there seems to be logic between the commandlets, work together, and naming convention. And this is a PowerShell group. We are very thankful for the support that Microsoft has given us over the years. We've had a number of Microsoft employees present here, certainly not looking to stir the power of Microsoft, but as you mentioned earlier, you've given the Microsoft people some grief about the Graph API and things that are missing. They see you work. What is it about your work that they don't kind of agree with? Because this seems, from a user standpoint, just so much more logical and like understandable. I mean, you literally have to be a developer to understand the Graph API to be able to function with it. And there's a whole section of people that are not developers.
I think we should probably ask some of the people that I have been so unkind to over the last few months to have a watch of this video.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Because the problem which we have with the Graph API is that it's very focused on the API itself. Nobody has focused on making an actual application that calls the API apart from the web interface. Okay, so nobody has actually come along and said PowerShell commands are an application. They should have as much sense embedded in them as Edge, for example, has embedded in it as a browser. All right. Nobody who uses Edge wants to know how server names are resolved and how you connect to HTTPS and what happens when certificates get exchanged. They just want it all to happen. Right. Well, that's the difference between an API and an application. Right, and it's very easy. A program's got an API at the bottom and a UI at the top, and it's got some logic in between. And all that they have produced is the really, really, really thin layer between something that you can execute and the API. And what I've done is said, well, what about all the sense of what we want? I've been doing this for so long. I've got my own ideas of how users want to call this stuff. So let's embed that sense in an application.
I mean, I guess maybe I'm beating a dead horse. I'm sorry to do this. Your viewpoint on this just makes so much sense as a leader of a PowerShell group and seeing how other PowerShell modules function, some good, some bad. But this feels like, I remember we had Jeff Hicks on one time, and he did a demo. He has a module called Get Vegetable, and I asked him, like, what is the purpose of this Get Vegetable module? And he said, I wanted to do a demo to show about how objects are handled in PowerShell without any colorization of Active Directory or SQL or Exchange or the file system, and to show them that it's just objects, and objects have properties, and there's more data and so forth and so on. And this fits all in with that, and it just makes so much more sense. As a guy like myself, I'm an on-prem admin coming to the Azure world and having to adjust from using PowerShell for years, doing on-prem stuff, and having to move to the Azure cloud and trying to figure out the Azure way to do stuff. I look at the Graph the Graph API and some of the stuff, and my head spins, and I've been doing this for a very long time. I can't imagine someone who's trying to tackle this for the first time unless they're coming out of school with a CS degree.
Yeah. And we're on exactly the same page with that. And just seeing one thing scrolling up the chat window from Stephen Judd, which I wanted to answer. Boolean parameters are always bad. Okay, but Boolean parameters are the work of the devil. You should never have something where the user has to write parameter name space true for 99% of the usage. Okay, so I've been lazy with allow Giphy because allow Giphy defaults true, and normally any of those parameters you'd be writing true, and it's only if you want to do the reverse case that you do :false. If the thing that you usually call is actually to say don't allow Giphy, then I should really have a parameter called block Giphy, which I then call to change from the default. But where you're only ever setting something true, and the setting it to false is a really, 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 really rare case, then the parameter should never be a Boolean. Yeah, that's the logic on that. Somebody else also was scrolling up the chat. How long has this taken so far? I think my family are asleep, so I can say it's mostly been done in my spare time, and there must be upwards of 1,000 hours work in here.
Well, I will, on that note, the community really amazes me. The amount of time that people invested into creating what is essentially open source software, right? There's no payback for this work. It's really just wanting to add for the good of the community and for the ease of use for whatever the motivation may be. It's amazing what some of the community members like yourself have produced.
Oh, thank you.
Oh my God. I'm reading this code. You can create calendar invites.
Yeah. So look
Awesome.
here. So I'm just going to. So right now, if we look at, go back to who I'm logged in as. Yeah. So who am I? So I'm on here with my admin account. So I'm that account, not the email address I gave you at the beginning. And if I do get graph team, new team minus members, I'm not in that group yet. Okay, so I'm just going to go add graph group member, new team, and you can see if I just do j at tab complete, you can see why even with Modular Consulting, I cannot be bothered to have a longer name. So I've just got a 1-character name. Okay, so now I'm in that group, and if I pop over to Outlook, let's hope that nothing too untoward is visible in my inbox. But Outlook should say sometime really soon. It's not doing it just yet, but it should say really soon that I have joined. Well, funnily enough, it hasn't sent me the mail to say I've joined the legal group, but down here in groups, I'm in the legal group. So I'm in it, but it hasn't yet. I haven't yet got the mail to say I'm in it. And if I go and look at calendars, you can see I've got the legal calendar here as well. All right. Now you can see here we've got the midweek lunch for the finance team, which I was messing around with before. What I'm going to do here is just choose this for a different day of the week. So I'm going to make this Thursday. So for the next year, the legal team are going to have a lunch every Thursday for the next 52 weeks. All right, and then we'll say who's going to attend that. So it's going to be the members and the owners of that, and we're just going to put that set of people into new event attendee. So we'll do that, and then we'll add an event to the calendar. And with a little bit of luck, what sometimes happens, you may hear a noise from my phone, and you may see me sort of jump. There you go. My phone has just had the invitation, and over here in Outlook, you can see Outlook has just said we've got an invitation, and it's filled that in for the midweek lunch for legal, and I hope it's in the legal calendar as well. All right, so all fairly simple to do, and we can do the same with notebooks. So we've had a team notebook before, so that was the notebook. We can go and get the sections from that notebook. So right now there are no sections in it, so I'm going to create one. So we've now got a section, and we can actually just take that URL and connect to that URL and see what's in the notebook. But I'll add a page first. So here's a page, and it's not going to say very much, but here's just a token page. Any HTML can go on that page. And if I go click here, here's my OneNote with my new section that I just created, a default home for your notes, and so on. And it would be rather nice, wouldn't it, if that actually showed up in Teams. So if I go over to Teams, come on, and go to Teams in Teams, you can see I'm now joined legal. And if you noticed up here, we've got posts and we've got files and we've got wiki. But what I'm just going to do is say I want to have a new OneNote tab in Teams. And if I come back to Teams, you just timed that right. I hope you just saw notes appear when I brought Teams back onto the screen. And if I go to notes, there's the OneNote section that we were just in before, which is kind of neat, I think. So now I've added the OneNote into there, and this was the thing I wanted to. This was where I started. I just wanted to send messages in Teams, so I can send that to the Teams channel. And if I come back to Teams and actually go to posts in the channel, you can see there's the message appeared in the channel that I wanted it to. And that was that. So yeah.
So James, if I'm keeping score, seems totally worth it. You can write the Teams. It only took you about an hour, 1,000 hours of development time. Great job.
Yeah. It's yeah, it was a real achievement. To be fair to myself, going back to the he says.
So in the same fashion, you're calling, new graph channel message and all that kind of stuff, and you put verbose in it, it's just going to give you what the API call was.
Yeah.
And so if you need to do anything that you're currently not doing, that if I have some task that I need to play with Excel and dump it into here, like you probably have that already, but I could just as easily just do verbose with some other stuff that's kind of similar and figure out what those API calls, because that's often the hardest part with a lot of these things, is not so much is, okay, what exactly is that API call, and what is, how do I parse these different parts together? Let me get this ID, and oh, it's the wrong ID, I need this part ID, and all that kind of stuff. That's always the hardest part when you're dealing directly with the graph itself, right?
Yeah. And so this stuff here, you can see what I'm calling, but let me try and show you what the process is. Actually, I will show you what the process is like, because something went wrong this evening. When I was saying before about the notebook not appearing properly, and I thought Microsoft had made a change to the API where they didn't provision a team notebook initially. So I then wrote something which I hadn't bothered with before, which was the add a notebook command. Okay, so up here you can see the help text is still wrong because I've copied this from another function, but oh, hang on, I'm looking at the wrong one. That's get. I want new graph notebook. New graph OneNote notebook. Yes, so the help text is broken, but this is just going to take a name, a team, and a site. Now, over here, God knows what I'm going to reveal in my history. Create notebook. So in Microsoft Docs, you've got the Graph API reference. Okay, so you can actually search for Microsoft Graph API, and eventually you will find a link that brings you to here. So when you go to navigate it, this hierarchy down the side is the different areas. So you can see there are one or two things which I just don't get into, like education and all the Intune related stuff. Okay, but down here in notes, we've got notebooks, and we've got, here's the API for creating a notebook. Okay, so what it tells me is we're either going to post to me OneNote notebooks, or user and then a GUID or a UPN name OneNote notebooks, or groups and a GUID, or sites and a GUID. And we post to one of those, and then the JSON that we have to send looks like this. Okay, so in order to do that, I've got a hash table that I'm going to splat into my command. Okay, and what we're going to say is the method is post, the content is JSON. We want to strip out any property that looks like this and convert the thing to a graph OneNote object when we're done. Okay, and then we can say, if we've been passed a team and we haven't got a team ID, then we've probably just been given a string, go and get a team object. If we've got a team ID, then that's going to be the path that you just saw in the on the web page. Okay, so if it's a team, we're gonna go to groups. If we got a site, well, again, we're going to say it looks like that. If we have a site ID, if someone's trying to give us a site name, we're going to fail. And if we haven't got a site or a team, we're just going to say we're going to create it as one of my notebooks. So that builds up the URI. Okay, so we've now got a splattable set of parameters with all those and URI in it. And then the body that we're going to pass, all we need is a hash table that looks like that and then convert it into JSON. And I find it's much easier to write the hash table like that and then convert it. So that just converts it to look like a piece of JSON. Everywhere I do this, I dump the JSON out to the debug channel so that we can debug it. And then in this particular case, we go if should process add a new notebook. In fact, that's wrong as well. But because this is adding something and not damaging anything, we won't do a confirmation anyway. So should process is always going to be true. We just run invoke graph request and that. So it's build the URI, figure out which method it is, and if you've got a sense of JSON, you're always going to send this, and then figure out what the JSON body is. The difficult bit usually is figuring out what you have to strip out so that the returned object will convert to one of these.
Impressive, super impressive.
Okay, but if you come along and you go and you say, so where's one that I don't, trying to think of one that I don't do at all. So insights, for example, I don't think I've done anything with insights, but if you said, you know, this is, I want to get a list of what's trending. Okay, you can see here, well, okay, that's what it looks like. You could take a simple one of my commands, and knowing that you call me insights trending, you could produce your own command in sort of 2 minutes flat.
So in that same fashion, is there anything that you think is like, another golden nugget? Because I think you've given up a whole bunch of stuff, and then after that is you're still taking contributions from others, how can people help you, or are you looking for help? Or
yeah, so anybody who wants to extend the coverage of this would be really welcome. I have not worked in an organisation that's using Intune for some while, and some of the stuff around Intune, which I think is under here. If somebody works with Intune and actually wanted to write an Intune section for it, I would be delighted to accept that. But anybody who came along and said, "Oh, you've done," try and think of something for example, I haven't bothered to set calendar permissions. If somebody said, well, it would be really nice if you could come and set calendar permissions for me. Yeah, well, I'll take that contribution. Some of
so how does those contributions come? Do like you strictly live inside GitHub? Is that how
yeah.
people can
So
help you?
if you go to the project in GitHub, so the link was there, but if you find me on GitHub, and originally before it was called Microsoft.Graph.Plus, it was just called MSFT Graph. And basically, if anybody sends me a pull request, I will be very happy to have them. Any issues people spot, again, I'm really happy to have them.
Is there any other ways that people can support you in any way? I know some people have like, buy me a coffee kind of thing. Is it?
I should at least do the buy me a coffee thing. If people want to send donations, I will put a thing up for donations by PayPal. But
I just think that 1,000 hours worth of work for this is impressive and should be rewarded.
Yeah, the number of downloads we've had for export or import Excel is pushing up to we reckon it'll break 1 million this August. I think, Doug, we haven't had more than 10 donations from 1 million downloads.
I think Doug had a drop off earlier.
All right.
Yeah.
The donate. So yeah,
I'm just
I haven't bothered. I keep saying I will finish writing my PowerShell book, and when I get the PowerShell book published, people can support me by buying the book. But yeah, at the moment there isn't a way of sending me cold hard cash. And yeah, the problem with most places is that if you're using this in any kind of business, it's really hard to actually pay a contribution to somebody, pay a donation to somebody, and have it and get it reimbursed. And so people who are using this would be paying out of their own pockets rather than their employer who's benefiting doing it.
Still, it's worth it though. But so like I don't know how confident I would be to be able to write something that I could submit to you from the code side. But a lot of developers are great at writing code, not so great at documentation and help files. Is there room for people to help on the simpler stuff as well?
So some of the stuff, yeah, just actually I'm fairly good at making sure that everything has got code and an example. The one thing that I am missing is sort of better test exposure. When you're working with so I have my own Microsoft Azure pack Action Pack Azure subscription that I use, and this is a production, albeit a small scale system, but it's the one through which I get my own email, and the amount that I can do in here to test things is very limited. other people who could come along and just test this and make sure, for example, everything that's in each of the examples still works. I haven't written us. If you look at what Doug and I have done with Excel, we've got a really good suite of pester tests. This hasn't got any, and so somebody who understood pester, who came along and wrote pester tests, somebody who actually came along and just went, you know what, you can make the English far clearer in the help. Those would all be a benefit. But the help is, you know, there's reasonably good coverage in the help. I'm not sure that it's you know, it would stand up to better proofreading, certainly.
Well, listen, it's a little bit of a call out to the community that's watching this video. This gentleman has donated quite a fair amount of his time to make a module that we all benefit from. If you have some spare hours and you can commit some grammatical changes, some help files, some pester tests, or maybe actually write some dev code that can help improve the module, there's definitely room for everybody here to do something to help this man along. He's done, I mean, an amazing amount of work on his own. I think us as a community can support him in some way, but at least at the very least say thank you for the work that you've done, but move the project along by just offering a second thread of work time rather than one person to doing all the work. But I don't know what you had planned to demo tonight. I don't know if you want to do more or if you've hit the limit here, but I mean, this is super impressive what you've done tonight, what you've showed tonight and the work that you've done. I mean, I'm again, as I said earlier, the idea that we're working with the Graph API, but it just feels like regular old PowerShell. I mean,
which is how it should. You know, like we were saying before, nobody wants to know the API behind the thing they're calling. You know, if you think of, you know, back in this window that I had here, you know, we call right at the top of this, we called Connect-AZ account, right? Now, you don't want to know what there's a REST API underneath that. You don't want to know how that works. Why would anybody want to know what the innards of that are? It's crazy, and yet what the only thing that we've got from the teams in Microsoft is this thing that basically says, in order to use this, you've got to understand all the ins and outs of the API. You cannot, you know, the thing that I showed with when I did, I'll do it again just to make it visible, but the that one, okay, you can. So I was showing you the docs site. All right, so this information is all there. Okay, when you go to it's. I was looking for users, and of course now I can't find where users are, so I just go user.
Well, related to that, it's not very, you know, transparent to find. Okay, hey, we're working with users, and then it's this whole like, we're here. Well, in what ways are we doing it? So, yeah.
Yeah. So list users, right? Optional query parameters. So you've got filter and select and search and so on. So get all users, and eventually down here you can see that we've got this kind of stuff for how we actually go and find a user. And this stuff is not simple. Okay, you're asking people to compose something that's really quite complicated, and it's okay once you've done a few, you know, you can do others. But like I was saying, even if you're a developer, and even if you understand this stuff, who is going to put this lot in a command line, right? And you know, it's not perhaps the most politically correct thing to say, but I work with a lot of people with very difficult to spell foreign names, and I have to have search, because I don't know if somebody called trying to think of one of the Indian guys, somebody with a name like Hiresh Kumar as his first name. I'm not entirely sure how you spell that first name, right? And his full name is probably his full UPN is probably 60 characters. I'm not.
Yeah, I think the thing is the idea is just that, you know, if you can support tab completion and you can make it, you know, easier for the end user overall to just deal with some of that, you know, I think that's the best, you know, feature of it all.
Yeah.
And,
but
you know, kind of abstracting some of that.
Icing on the cake. It's
Yeah.
You have to be able to do that, right? If I can't do that, which I could do with on-prem Active Directory, you know, to me, it's not usable.
Yeah.
So James, just wanted to, there's a question in the chat here from Stevie Valdinger. He wants to see how you build URLs. Is there a private function hiding that does the actual call to graph?
Yeah, okay, well, let's actually show you. Input module.
Yeah, and I think we're getting along too. So let's kind of like wrap this up, and you know, I think we could even you know, just take that offline too, because I think, you know, one of the biggest features of this whole thing is, hey, tab completion is there, is your friend. Pipeline is just magic, and the basic help that you've written so far will get you 90% there. It's not feature complete as you'd accept, but you accept, you know, new features as people aren't find them. And so
yeah,
really,
and the feature completeness. Remember the auto-generated stuff has 100% coverage, but it's got no intelligence.
yeah.
Okay, this is kind of taking the functions that I think are important and giving them some intelligence. So the completeness of coverage is a function of what I think has been important up to now.
Yep.
So there is that's why there's no Intune, because I don't work with Intune.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean it can't be there, but it also,
No,
you know, even the
not.
implementation is just where it is.
But somebody else will need to contribute the bits that I don't think are important.
Yep. And again, where can people, you know, find some more information about you, and we'll go from there. I don't think that we need to keep that in the recording as far as, you know, that. I think that's more deeper than other people need to know, or unless you agree there, James. You know, I'm gonna leave that up to you.
Well, I think there's enough in the recording for people to find me. So somebody wanted to know how the URL was built. So let's say I'm just going to step through it here. This is the thing I was about checking whether we've got the right credentials to get a user, and so this is basically saying we've got a username and it's not a UPN or a GUID. So I need F11 here, don't I? So now we're gonna go and get this as a list of users, and the list basically says we've got a filter on there, so we need to add a header, otherwise this doesn't work properly, which is a really nice thing Microsoft did. We're going to make sure that we get all the right properties, and then this is building the URI. So graph URI is just a global variable, and then that's built the URI there. Okay, and then we've added the select fields. So URI looks like that now. That was the thing you saw me calling. And then this builds up the URI. So depending on what else has been called. And now we dive into invoke graph request. And invoke graph request is a wrapper. Oh, that's useful. I just pressed F10 instead of F11. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint there and try and do that again. That doesn't need to be there. So just keep pressing F11. So this is checking work or school account. And in fact, what I want to do is just go back to where I put that breakpoint. So now, let's do this properly. If not name, oh, sorry, we've got a name. So now we build up that filter string. And now we call invoke graph request. And invoke graph request, as I was saying before, that's the wrapper for what's actually built into the SDK modules. And the main thing about this is it knows how to call the request with the necessary security headers. So I don't have to do the work of adding headers to invoke web request command in PowerShell. So when I do that, it checks that I'm connected. And then you can see this is where it's actually calling the one that's provided by the SDK. And then I do some work and say, if depending on what's being fetched, we may say we're dealing with multiple values rather than a single object. And then once we've got that object, we can do some cleanup on it, and then we call new object and the type name. So if I step through all of that, so for each result that we get, basically we go through and remove any properties that are excluded, and then we've specified as type. So right now we've got a hash table $R, and that's the user that we've got, and then we're going to turn that into in fact, in this case, we're not going to turn it into anything. We're just going to return that user and process the user at the other end. But that's the guts of it. So it's the one I was showing previously is probably a better example, but this one in notes is a simpler one to call. So you can see it's, as I said, just build the URI here and then pass that to invoke graph request, and that will take the URI, the method, and the data type and return you the objects.
Wow, that goes down deep into the rabbit hole.
Well, somebody did ask.
No, that's awesome. No, that is like I'm at a loss for the work involved that you've put into this to make it complete or as seamless as it is today. And you know, hats off to you. You know, and you know, again,
most of the work was done 2 years ago, and then this SDK stuff came out, and as I say, it more or less killed it stone dead. And then I came back and said, I can take most of what already exists, and literally, instead of where I'd been calling invoke web request and putting my authentication headers in, and I had my own incredibly baroque logon stuff, because the stuff for that is not easy and straightforward. I can just say, well, call the logon stuff that they're doing for me, and call their invoke, and then I can reuse all the same code. So most of the work to make this work on the SDK was coming back, and all this stuff was the same, but all I had to do here was just change what I was calling to be invoke graph request and make subtle changes to these parameters. And yeah, that was so making it work with the SDK was the easy part. The kind of exploring all this stuff from exploring all the stuff that's in the
So to come back to the beginning, there is that the requirements for getting started here is you need the SDK, which you can get from, you know, you need the Graph SDK, which you can download from Microsoft. And then once you install that and the parts you need, and then to install the module from PS Gallery, PowerShell Gallery.
Yeah, so basically, if you go to the PS Gallery, let's actually do that as well. So if I just go, as a quick and dirty way of getting to the PowerShell Gallery. So if you just go here and just do a search for Microsoft Graph, you could download the whole lot, right? And if you download this one, actually it's got all the child modules, or you can just bring down the ones that you're interested in. So you can bring down authentication and users, for example, which should be down here somewhere. So you can bring down authentication and users, and then you've just got the bits that you need. And I'm fairly sure that I've specified that if you haven't already got authentication, downloading the ++ version will pull down authentication for you. So if you wanted to do the Intune bits, for example, you could just install Intune or Microsoft Graph.Intune, and then you follow the same pattern that I've done. So it's load the DLLs.
So you first have to install their module, at least the parts that you were looking for, right? It just needs to be installed. It doesn't need to actually be invoked. So when you then import Graph ++, you just do that, and then it knows that these modules have already been installed.
Yeah. So what you can see, I've got the DLLs in here. Okay, and when the module loads, he says, I'm going to regret going into here, but there are all my classes for the tab completion, and somewhere, here we go. So these names in the hash table correspond with the names of the DLLs. Okay, so we've got personal contacts, identity directory management, users functions, users actions, identity sign-ins and reports. These are the items listed here are then any commands that we're going to load that are present in those modules. And then we go through and we basically say, if you can find the module in the current directory, the DLL in the current directory, great, go load the DLL from here. Otherwise, go find where the module is and just load the DLL. And I think you can just see there. So they all follow the same name. So just load the DLL from the module. And if the module is not present, then you just go, right, verbose, we didn't find that one. We're going to skip that. And a bit later on, we go, right, so all these skipped ones, we can say, if skipped contains users, then these modules only rely on users.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we load those, and then for the other modules, we just go through, and if we were able to find users, for example, we then load
those parts
there. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if the file here is called reports, there'll be a reports here, and there should be a reports there. So reports, we need the DLL from reports because it defines some types that we don't get anywhere else, but we don't need any of its functions.
All right. So again, it's pretty feature complete. So I think, again, mad props to, all the work you've put into this. And, is there, anything else you'd like to say? Any last words? Like, I really appreciate, you come into this group and putting it together. And for those who, join us after the fact and who are watching this on YouTube, is that, don't forget we meet twice a month, and feel free to look us up on YouTube and enjoy the night. Any last words, James?
No, I think if you've enjoyed what you've seen, and you think it's worth other people looking at it, tweet out the link to the YouTube video when it's there, and promote the hell out of the YouTube video.
But we'll definitely do that. So I would just say thank you again for presenting. This was fantastic, really enjoyable. I think the people in attendance here really enjoyed this as well. There was a lot of questions in the chat, a lot of good chatter about just the quality of the work and the thought process put into this. If you're watching this on YouTube and you made it this far, first of all, thank you for sticking with us this long. Check out our YouTube channel. We have plenty of great content. We have over 100 other videos on all things related to PowerShell. At the end of this video, you'll get some suggestions on things that might be useful to you. So with that, maybe we should wrap this up and say good night. Phil, it's been another good meeting. Thanks for reaching out and saying we should get James on. This was like a home run grand slam. This was such a fantastic event. And James, thank you for staying up late with us. I mean, I know it's late.
I shall now go to bed, and I shall prop my eyes open with a couple of matchsticks in the morning for work.
Well, thank you so much.
Super appreciate it. Super appreciate it.
All right. Night, everybody. I'm going to drop off now.
Thanks so much again.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Cheerio.